Three. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Santita Jackson Show on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. It's a joy to be with you today. Thank you so much for joining our show and just really giving us so much wonderful feedback. I'm so grateful to you. It's just a privilege to be with you every day. AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota, is my home. But I want you to meet my morning stars on the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel. You'll get a chance to put the faces to all of these beautiful ideas. And we have a good time. The Santita Jackson Morning Stars on my YouTube channel, The Santita Jackson Show. It's a wonderful conversation. I want you to be a part of that community. Please, please, please do it. You can do it on your phone as well. And of course, the Santita Jackson and Friends Facebook page. You can go there as well. But Facebook, because of the traction that you have given us, has asked me to ask you to go to the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel. So if you would, please go there, like and subscribe. Like and subscribe. Click that bell so that we can notify you when we come on, and let's get to it today. There is so much going on in the world today. You don't even know which story to choose. There's just so much. I mean, I think we're watching a reset of the American Republic, and who knows where that is going to go. We're asking some profound questions. I was talking to Marjorie Cohn from the Lawyers Committee. She's a brilliant, brilliant legal scholar. I'm going to have her on in a few days. And as we were talking, I said, I think I'm not a legal scholar, Professor Cohn, but I feel like the Republicans, instead of fighting monarchs, we're now fighting oligarchs. It's just, we continue to get just ever so much closer to justice for everyone, incrementally. But there are going to be some profound changes. And people are asking profound questions, and we're watching the sands shift beneath our feet. Oh, just a decade ago, let alone 20, 30, 40 years ago, you could not utter the name Palestinian, the proper noun. You couldn't. And now this is a name that flows off of everyone's lips. Now people are not trying to destroy Israel, but they are, like good friends do, being critical to help make Israel what it's supposed to be. So let's think about that. You cannot call yourself a friend, Chip Gibbons, Policy Director at Defending Rights and Dissent, and National Conference of Lawyers, brilliant attorney and civil libertarian, attorney Mark Fancher. You cannot call yourself a friend if you don't criticize a friend, if you allow them to do things that are damaging to themselves, let alone to others. And so that's where we are. We're watching these college students all across America, and the numbers are growing every day. They're having what I had in the 80s when I was in college, shanty towns, protesting apartheid. That's when you saw that movement really take off. And I used to go up to visit one of my best friends. Two of my best friends were at Yale. And I would go up and visit them maybe a couple of times a semester. And when I saw the shanty town on the main yard at Yale, I was like stunned. And they were there, rain or shine, did not move. But you saw it all over the country. I was arrested at the South African Embassy in Washington when I was in college at the beginning of finals. If you could do it, you did it. You did what you could then. And now we were fighting apartheid there. Now we're fighting it over here. We're fighting it all over the world. But now you're seeing pushback against a student population who are quite vulnerable. The Black students and the Palestinian students up at Harvard are saying we are being treated more harshly. They're not complaining, they're pointing that out. You just saw Ilhan Omar's daughter really take a hit for her mom. Her mother was in a congressional hearing and sharply criticized and questioned. And her daughter was suspended the next day.
Yep.
Her daughter was in the newspaper. She said, I cannot even get into the room to get my clothes. They threw my clothes out unceremoniously out the door and threw her clothes out.
Mm.
Of course, her meal card doesn't work. So she's got to figure out how to eat in one of the most expensive cities on earth. And now you have the overtaking of the main yard at Columbia. Took some classes there too when I went to New York. And these students are serious, but something interesting is happening to them. As the police are coming on the campus to try to remove them, they're scanning their photos, their photo IDs, so that there can be a record. of who's protesting. What does that mean? You had the head of the law students at NYU. This young black woman she's been told, you will not get a job. And that's happening to the Harvard students. It's happening all over the country. So let's talk about this. Let's talk about this particularly now as these students, I'm going to start with you, Chip Gibbons. Um, it seems that they are really, and it's not surprising because it's springtime, but they're amping up the protest.
Well, yeah, and I think those are all excellent points. And, I was around, I first learned about the Palestinian cause during the Iraq War, George W. Bush's Iraq War, not the father's Iraq War. There's been so many Iraq wars I have to specify. I know. And you're absolutely right. In the last 15 years, 20 years, the turnaround on Palestine and the discourse has been really remarkable. I mean, obviously, it is still the most dangerous issue to talk about. You can lose your job, you can get arrested, all those things can happen to you. But the level of discourse in this country versus where we were 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago is really incredibly remarkable. And I think they're really scared. I mean, we should remember why these students are protesting. Since October the 7th, Israel has been engaged in a brutal war against the people of Gaza, a war that is clearly targeting civilians, a war that every reputable monitor of international situations, from human rights NGOs to UN experts, has documented violations of international humanitarian law, has documented war crimes. We saw South Africa take Israel to the International Court of Justice, accusing them of genocide. And I sat through those proceedings because I was covering them for Jacobin. And, the South African case for genocide is really very strong. There is a very strong argument that what Israel is doing is rising to the level of genocide. And, in the last week, we're seeing reports about discoveries of mass graves in Gaza, these horrific stories with hundreds of people, many with their hands tied behind their backs, who were clearly either killed execution style, or I was reading a UN report that some of them, or an article about the UN call for an investigation, saying that some of them were potentially buried alive. So we're witnessing horrific atrocities. And what we're seeing is young people of conscience speaking out against these atrocities. And the protest, I've watched videos of them. There's one in DC. I'm going to head to it later on to see what's going on. They've been incredibly peaceful. Right. We're talking about people on a campus lawn. We're talking about people gathering with tents and signs. And the response to them has been absolutely vitriolic and aggressive. On Friday of last week, we saw Columbia call the NYPD on their own students. They said the students were a clear and present threat. The NYPD said they were peaceful. And I was in New York during Occupy Wall Street, so I know the NYPD is not a friend of protesters. So when the NYPD is saying the protesters are peaceful, you're really doing something wrong, Columbia calling the police in. And then I remember earlier this week, there was a rumor they were going to call the NYPD or the National Guard. And my organization, in the dead of night, sent a letter or an email to the Columbia president urging her not to do that. And now we see the protests are spreading. We see protests at UT Austin, University of Texas in Austin. I believe 50 people were arrested yesterday or today. Protesting, including a photojournalist. We saw protests at Emory University in Atlanta, I believe, where there were 108 arrests. And I read there were almost 100 arrests in California at the UC system. So all across the country, people are going out and peacefully saying, we don't want this genocide carried out in our names. We don't want our institutions of higher learning doing business or investing in companies that benefit from apartheid, that benefit from war, that benefit from ethnic cleansing. And we don't want our government backing what is clearly a genocide. And they are being arrested, attacked. I had someone online keep tweeting at me about all the violence the protesters are doing. I said, send me a video of it. And the only violence in the video I saw was the police attacking the students. The University of Texas, Austin. The students were entirely peaceful. They were standing on a lawn, and the police were arresting them quite violently. And it is really shameful that we are now not only backing another country's crimes, we are ripping up our own First Amendment to prevent people from criticizing that country.
How so? I mean, and I just feel like even the protesters The demonstrators, let me just demonstrators, because that's what they're doing. They're demonstrating their points of view.
Yes.
What we're watching in corporate media, Chip Gibbons and attorney Mark Vantra, is this. We're only hearing from frightened Jewish students. And mind you, I certainly understand their fear. You know, when you understand what they've been taught about the Holocaust is as if it happened to them. And I can completely understand that. Particularly as an African American who's still on the soil that is drenched with the blood of my foreparents. I get it. There's some places that Black people, you know, and Mark, I think I can have a witness here. There's some places that give you the shakes as a Black person in America today. Places where you do not want to be, you don't feel safe, and you get out pretty quickly. So I understand that. But what you don't hear is much about Islamophobia. Well, the people we're not seeing interviewed are the demonstrators. The people we're not seeing interviewed are the people whose mothers and fathers and grandmamas and grandfathers and cousins and family members and friends who are over in Gaza and the West Bank right now. Rashida Tlaib's grandmother lives over there. I mean, right now. And then other people who've lost 50, 100 members of their family, or the whole family's been wiped out. We're still not hearing those stories. And so when you talk about First Amendment rights and freedom of expression, that to me, doesn't that fall under that umbrella?
Yes, you're 100% correct. And I will just say anti-Semitism is a deplorable form of bigotry that
Absolutely.
is responsible for some of the worst crimes in history. And I have no...
Wait a minute. I think we need to put a fine
some of the worst.
Because these are Semitic people too.
Yes.
They're Arab brothers and sisters.
Yes.
So anti-Jewish sentiment.
Anti-Jewish sentiment is responsible for some of the worst crimes in history. And I have no sympathy or tolerance for it. But the stories about anti-Jewish bias at these protests that the media has been trafficking in, a lot of them just aren't true. And a number of the protesters, especially at Columbia, are Jewish students themselves.
They're helping to drive this.
And I would remind people that Columbia suspended Jewish Voice for Peace, right? They suspended the Jewish Voice for Peace group. Obviously, and you see people in the media. There was a journalist this week who shared a picture of what he said was an anti-Semitic protester at the Columbia protest. And everyone pointed out the picture was not taken inside Columbia. It was just a random guy in New York who's always out there. And of course, it's horrible. There are people with anti-Jewish bigotry who hold up signs and things like that. But you saw a journalist take a picture of an anti-Jewish bigot, not inside Columbia, not part of the occupation, not anything to do with the protest, and put it on social media and say it was the protest. And there is a real effort to demonize these young people as being anti-Jewish, as being pro-terrorist, as being violent, as being all of these things that all of the evidence shows they are not. And the reason for that is because otherwise no one wants to say, we will not let you peacefully protest a genocide. We will arrest you if you go on the lawn and call for peace and a ceasefire. They don't want to say that. So they are manufacturing these stories in order to justify the state repression. And journalists who are trafficking in disinformation. Remember, we were all so upset about disinformation at one point, but apparently it's okay in this context. These journalists who are trafficking in this disinformation are helping to facilitate.
They are, because these are the only people they're interviewing. And not these people who have this anti-Jewish bias. I mean,
yes,
that is awful. Nobody support. Well, if you do support it, that's sick. Nobody's doing that, because actually, this is not a Jewish-Muslim fight. This is a political one.
Yes.
It's about land and resources, okay? So kumbaya, everybody can get together. People marry and have children together across ethnic, racial, and religious lines. I really don't care how you worship. I mean, and more, and these young kids really don't care.
No.
I mean, they're way over that. So that's not the point. This is a political issue. This is about gas and oil that the British and American companies continue to make money hand over fist, cheating the Gazans out of their money. They are being moved out of a place where you hit pay dirt with gas and oil. That's what this is. And let's be real clear. They want them out of there for those reasons. Just follow the money. When you had at the founding of the state of Israel, they could have been in Texas. That was even up for, I mean, or Uganda.
Yeah.
Come on. And guess what is to see people suspended from school, to see them, and they're not being threatened with unemployment. They will not be employed, Chip. This young woman at NYU undergrad is $100,000 a year. Now,
Wow.
I mean, look, it's almost 100. It's like 98. Isn't that 100? University of Chicago is already 100 for the undergraduate. So
Wow.
you know what it is for people who are in law school. So you're telling these people who are carrying this massive student debt, who are at these schools, please, state schools cost a lot of money. And what is going on? Because you wrote a letter.
Sure.
Defending Rights and Dissent wrote a letter to the president of Colombia. Now they're threatening. What did the Speaker of the House went up there? I don't know why, pouring kerosene on this fire. She needs to be fired. I mean, but what? What was in your letter, and why did you? What did Defending Rights and Dissent say?
Sure. I want to comment that, people like Speaker Mike Johnson, who are going to pour kerosene on the fire, are undermining their own arguments that this is a dangerous or violent place to be. You'll remember on January 6th, they all went and hid from the January 6th people. If they thought there was danger and violence at Columbia, they wouldn't go stand there with a bunch of microphones and antagonize the students.
Outdoors.
Yes, across from the encampment. Screaming at them and telling them, the inmates are running the asylum and all the awful things that they said. So we wrote a letter to the president of Colombia, and we generally don't weigh in on what private institutions do. Mm-hmm. But the nexus between what the Columbia University is doing and state actions is so close, we felt the need to weigh in. Last week, there was this really grotesque hearing in the House Education Committee. As you mentioned, college tuition at both state and private schools is unaffordable for working class people, and the state and the House Education and the Workforce Committee is having these McCarthyite hearings focusing on pro-Palestinian speech at schools. In the case of Columbia, a private school, and they really were attacking specific professors and encouraged them to fire them because of their views. And during the hearing, she admitted that when the students held an event that was not authorized by the college online, they called the FBI on the students. They reported the students to the FBI. And the day after this hearing, she called the NYPD to clear up the encampment. So we wrote a letter documenting 3 concerns. First and foremost, her collaboration with the McCarthyite hearing, where she sort of allowed the Congress people to imply that professors should be fired for their points of view and said nothing about it. Then we criticized her for reporting political speech protected by the First Amendment to the FBI. And we all know on this panel, I think, the very ugly history of FBI repression of social movements, of Black liberation movements, of Palestine liberation movements. And then we criticized her decision to bring in the NYPD. To remove the students who were clearly peaceful, citing the NYPD captain's own comments. So we brought up all of these points with her, with the Columbia president, and we issued some recommendations, including investigating why they reported students to the FBI, promising not to call the NYPD again, and then also educating staff on the First Amendment and the history of McCarthyism in this country and how it impacted the academic world. And within 24 hours of sending this letter, we're hearing these reports from students that the administration is threatening the students with either the police or the National Guard. And at that point, we sent a second email. It was in the middle of the night, almost. I felt like it was about 11:30, asking her to please refrain from calling the National Guard or please refrain from calling the NYPD and respecting the students' rights. And at this point, they haven't done so. I think Columbia has backed down because they've gotten such bad publicity, but the protests are spreading to other colleges and the repression is spreading too.
I want you to stay right here, Chip. I know you don't have a lot of time, but I wanted to bring on Mark Fancher, attorney Mark Fancher, brilliant civil libertarian, National Conference of Black Lawyers. And we're not. I want. I'd like for you to bring your perspective in. What are you hearing? Because I mean, when you look at the Palestinian protesters who are being targeted, Palestinian Americans. When you're watching the black students who are being targeted, when you're watching, much of this is led by Jewish students. I mean, young Jewish people are appalled by this. They are. I mean, if not now, and Jewish Voice for Peace, these kids are out in these streets, and no one makes a more forceful arguments than they. And all of these young people. And I'm thinking about the Democratic Convention coming to Chicago, and boy, oh boy, I think this is a harbinger of this. I think this Chicago will be this on steroids because that's what we do. What do you make of all of this, Mark?
Well, I think that the repression that we're seeing is the best news I've heard in years.
Now, just want you to know, Mark is a contrarian. Just kidding.
No,
No. I
no,
mean,
no.
I'm with
I'll
you. I'm
explain.
with
I'll
you.
explain why.
Please.
It has been decades since mass protest of any kind caused any even a ripple of concern among those who run the state. Back years ago, A. Philip Randolph went to the president and just threatened a massive march on Washington, and everybody freaked out. And he was able to get concessions just by threatening mass protest. Years later, in 1963, when Dr. King actually carried out a march on Washington, the government freaked out. They sent everybody, all the government employees, home. They had buses that were ready to take large numbers of people to jail. They thought that the country was going to be turned upside down by this demonstration, and it wasn't. And in the years since then, there have been so many mass protests for all kinds of things, protesting everything from police violence to the Vietnam War to the killing of George Floyd. At this point, the state has seen mass protest many times. And in many ways, they've got responses to it down to a science. In fact, if any group, any movement comes to the police and says, we want to have a peaceful protest, we want to have a demonstration, the police are thrilled to hear that because they know exactly how to deal with it. They've been training in this for decades. They know exactly how to deal with peaceful mass protest. It is no longer a mystery to them. And in fact, they're getting pretty good at dealing with militant protests that involve acts of what some might regard as violence. They know this stuff. It is no mystery to them. It doesn't cause them any concern anymore. So protests of the kind that we've been seeing on these campuses are very tame compared to what we've seen even in recent years, particularly in response to police violence. And so it should not cause this level of concern just purely on the merits of the protests themselves in terms of what these students are actually doing. So when you see this type of heavy-handed response to this type of demonstration, what that says to me is that it's not so much what the students are doing, it's what the students are thinking. And that is always the thing that concerns the state more than anything else is, are the people thinking? Are they analyzing? Are they figuring us out? That's what causes them concern because their survival depends on keeping people confused, misled, and deluded. And when people begin to gain some measure of clarity with respect to politics and the politics of their situation, an understanding of how the world works, where the true threats to the people are, then that is what they regard as very dangerous. And so you can have the most militant, flamboyant, outrageous kind of a so-called leader that you can imagine, who's out there stomping and fussing and fighting and spouting all kinds of militant rhetoric. But if that is a person who is not thinking clearly, then the state does not regard that person as a threat. The state likes that person. because he or she is contributing to the confusion. But you get somebody who might be even very soft-spoken, somebody who is not necessarily terribly charismatic, but somebody who thinks with great clarity, someone who is not at all confused, who's got it all figured out. That's the person who's dangerous. And these are dangerous students because they're not doing anything extremely militant. They're just thinking. And so that's why I say that the reaction is an indication of just how shaken the state is by what these students are doing. And that thrills me to no end because they've tapped into something that has some real meaning in terms of movement and how effective the movement can potentially be. And so, my thinking is that whatever it is that they're saying, whatever it is that they're thinking, however it is that they're analyzing, they need to stay on that track and keep pushing, no matter how hard the state comes down on them, because this means that they're making progress. They're doing something that's making a difference for the advance of humanity. And I think that we need to applaud them all and give them all the support that we can give them.
Absolutely. I mean, and Chip, your response, because I think Mark hits it on the head. Jonathan Greenblatt of the ADL was having a meeting, right? We all were all familiar with it, in which they were alarmed that October 7th did not trigger the response that they thought it was going to trigger. I mean, they said the worst attack since the Holocaust. It was horrific. It was. But something else happened. And in this meeting of Jewish leadership, he said, you don't understand. We've got a TikTok problem. We've got a generational problem. There is a generational shift. This is, y'all keep trying to make this about Democrats and Republicans. No, we've lost the young people. They're seeing this differently. They're thinking about this differently. When I talk to these young Jewish activists who are pushing against apartheid, they learned about apartheid by their, every young Jewish person has the opportunity to go to Israel free of charge. So they go. And then many of them came back and said, this is not what I thought this was going to be. Now I've got to unlearn everything. And everybody can have that moment. And so what do you think is going on? Because he did say TikTok, we got a TikTok problem now, tucked into this this foreign military aid package, which Americans did not want. But because of the money and because of the influence of all these forces, congresspersons voted for it, even though Americans don't want it. It was like, wait, we need that $95 billion right here. We do. What is going on here? I mean, and is the president of Colombia, is she making a play to keep her job?
I can't tell you what the president of Colombia is doing. I mean, she is attempting to appease people in Congress who want her gone, who want speech stamped out, and in the process, she's alienating her own students and faculty. I think she's in an untenable position, and I think she's probably gone. Right? Mm-hmm. There's nobody who supports her at this point. The faculty and the students are angry that she's selling them out. The people she sold them out to will never be appeased unless they get rid of everyone in the universities, right? So they're not appeased. I do think it is very notable that these protests are extremely mild compared to protests we've seen, just 4 years ago, and they are triggering this level of repression. I do think there's an incredible fear about the fact that a majority of Americans do support a ceasefire, and a majority of our government does not support a ceasefire. Our supposedly democratic government is completely out of step with the people right now. And the only response they can dream up is to send more aid to Israel, more aid to Ukraine, ban TikTok, and send the police and maybe even the National Guard into college campuses. They are scared because they have lost control of the narrative. They have lost control of the people. And what kind of democracy is it where they vote on military aid packages that people don't want, where they vote for surveillance packages that the people don't want, and then when the people protest peacefully, they come in with billy clubs and tear gas and rubber bullets? That's not much of democracy, is it?
No, it's not. I mean, but have we really had one? No, it's something that we've been trying to reluctantly drag everybody toward. I mean, that's that, because this is a country, Reverend Jesse Jackson reminds us that this is a right-wing nation. We've had left-wing movements, but it is moored in right-wingism. And that is what we're fighting all the time.
It is, but I think we're really seeing a sincere shift. When you look at the
Yeah.
polling
Oh, he
around,
was saying that we see a shift, but that's because we're shifting it.
oh, I know we're shift. I know the shift is because of us. It didn't happen, on its own. But I really think they're afraid of that shift. I think when they talk about when the ADL and supporters of Israeli apartheid talk about a TikTok problem or a generational problem, they are really terrified that we are shifting, that more and more people are waking up to what is happening to the Palestinians.
But do they not understand that if they take away TikTok and force its sale to someone else, the signal that sends, I mean, it's happening in people's faces, right with their eyes wide open, and they're talking about it, Chip. I mean, I watch Washington Journal. I say this all the time. At some point in the day, I mean, if I can't catch it early in the morning, I catch it at some point. I always watch the recording because I love when they open up the phone lines, Chip Gibbons and attorney Mark Fancher, because I want to hear what Americans have to say. And they're saying things I've never heard them say before. They're questioning foreign aid. They're directly questioning not only aid to Israel, but our relationship with them. They're appalled and shocked and in disbelief about what's happening to the Palestinians because they were the bad guys up until October 7th.
Yeah.
And I think taking down TikTok and banning us from talking about it, that's only going to make the situation worse for them. It's going to make us clearer, I think. I mean, so where do we go from here? What's going to happen with these kids?
Repression frequently backfires. I mean, they responded extremely heavy-handedly to a small protest at Columbia, and now they have protests on college campuses across the country. I think the more heavy-handed they get, the more protests we're going to see. I was at Occupy Wall Street on the very first day, and there was nothing notable about it. It was just another protest. But a few days later, the police came and pepper sprayed that young woman who they had kettled. Yeah. On the sidewalk, and Jon Stewart played the video and did a whole thing about it. And after that, Occupy Wall Street grew and encampment spread across the country. So repression can backfire. And right now, what we are seeing is that repression is dramatically backfiring on the college administrations, on the police, on the ruling class. But at this same point, we still have a Democratic and a Republican Party with some dissenting voices of the Democratic Party that are lockstep behind what Israel is doing, and in a lot of cases, lockstep behind repressing the protest. And the media is going along with it too. So we are in a dangerous moment, and I don't know what happens next. Repression can backfire. But I also always point out the left did not enter the McCarthy era in a place of weakness. They entered it in a place of strength, and they were destroyed by it. So repression can also succeed. I know that's an obvious thing to say. Repression can backfire or it can succeed. That's not a really profound comment. But I think it's too early to tell what way this works out. And I'm hoping this is a shift in our country. But
do you think will this push the needle on policy? Or, well, I mean, it's pushing the needle on attitudes. But what about policy?
I hope so. I mean, right now, Congress, you have Mike Johnson telling Joe Biden into the National Guard. You have some Democrat talking about left-wing fascist. The ceasefires protesters are left-wing fascist. So, I mean, we see, more support for Palestine in Congress than we have at any point in my life. We have Ilhan Omar, we have Rashida Tlaib, we have Cori Bush, we have Summer Lee. We have Greg Cesar, which we didn't have, 5 years ago. But we still have a leadership in both parties. I mean, Nancy Pelosi said again yesterday that the protesters were the work of Putin, right? We've heard the protesters are the work of Putin. We saw the ADL head saying they're Iranian proxies. We hear people say they're caused by China. So there is this sort of, I think, disbelief, and I think some of these people believe it. Right. They don't understand how anyone can disagree with them unless there's some sort of sinister force that is manipulating them. And I think other people are being cynical themselves in pushing this. But the response of a lot of people right now is just, oh, This is all Putin's doing, or this is Hamas's doing. And I don't think the leadership in either party yet gets it. I think if we continue in the direction that we're going in, they're going to have to get it. But right now, I don't think people like Mike Johnson or Nancy Pelosi or Joe Biden or Donald Trump or RFK Jr., who's terrible on Palestine.
Which is shocking. He's like,
oh, I know. Really understand what's happening in this country right now.
well, I mean, he's 180 degrees from everything else that he stands for. I just talk about perplexing, but it is what it is. And wait a minute, Donald Trump is to the left of him and Biden.
Well,
Donald Trump in an interview with Hugh Hewitt, he was pressed on whether he was 100% behind Israel. He would not answer the question. He said, I keep telling you, this is a PR disaster. Okay, that's the lens to which he sees it. He says, do you know that people are sitting at home and they're watching buildings collapsed on people? He said directly, whatever you were doing, you need to finish it so we can go back to normalcy and peace. Those are not my words. Those are his.
Yeah.
I don't need to tell everybody. Trump is not my guy. He is not the horse I'm riding on in this race. But I shouldn't have to say that. A broken clock can be right twice a day. If you're just going to take that clinical view, he's far away from where Biden is. He's far away from where RFK is. He's closer to Cornel West. I mean, it's and Jill Stein. I mean,
it was hard for you to say that. It was hard for you to say that. I could tell.
I couldn't get it out of my mouth.
I know. I the Cornel West. I could tell you were pained.
No, look, I'm in pain because I'm like, but
I know.
When I saw the blurb, I know enough about these things to chase down exactly what you said. And part of it is, and I will say this to you, Attorney Mark Fancher, as I bring on Darrell Jones, Chairman of the Transformative Justice Coalition. I have to tell you all, Chip, having grown up and watched my father misrepresented and other leaders misrepresented, it makes me very sensitive. And so I want to know exactly what you said. I want to hear it all. I mean, whatever it is, and whoever you are, let me hear everything that you said. And that way I can make a judgment. I don't like to arrive at conclusions. I don't like to jump to them. And I think that, when I'm watching these young people who are being characterized as violent, which is not true, they're passionate. Violent, no. And I do believe, just given my own experience in civil rights, the only time Dr. King's march, he had one march that ended in violence. And it was a young Black Morehouse student who stoked the violence, and he was CIA affiliated. So I'm watching that as the NYPD, who are basically an arm of the FBI. That's where their headquarters are, right? They're married to each other. They're taking the pictures of their IDs. I mean, what? How's that supposed to work? We just want to know who they are. Why? Chip, I know you got to go. I wish you didn't. But tell what is your culminating thought here? Because we're going to be talking about this, I'm sure.
I think that the level of repression is indicative of how scared people in power are right now of these protests, and that they have lost control of the narrative on Palestine. They've lost control of the narrative on a lot of other things, and that they don't know how else to react. And I do not think a situation can continue where the vast majority of people support a ceasefire and the vast majority of our government does not. I don't know where this goes, but what we're doing right now isn't going to be able to continue. And I don't think the Israelis can continue to occupy Palestine for another 6-7 decades. This isn't going to keep working the way it is. Whatever happens next, I do not think there's a return to the status quo. I don't. But what comes next could be worse. I don't know. But
they say it's darkest before the dawn. I do believe we're watching the dawning of a new day, though.
It just keeps getting darker and darker, and I keep thinking, it's darker before the dawn, and then it gets darker.
Well, when they crucified Jesus, we got midnight in the middle of the day. It will happen. But it will. Let me tell you, I am a woman who believes that God is real and God has won. Now, when I get out of here, I hope I meet our Maker, and I want God to say to me, "My child, you are on my side." That's all I want, and that's all I'm pushing for. That's all I got left. I ain't got nothing left. I mean, that's it for me. And I believe I heard Andrew Young say that once. He said, at the end of my life, I want when I get that great getting up morning, I know that God has won. I want God to say, "Son, you were on my side." I said, "That's enough for me. That's it. That's it." And so the world can take everything from me. That's fine. I'm waiting for another kind of reward. And so that's it. And thank you for the work that defending rights and dissent that you do every single day.
Thank you. Have a
Thank
good
you. Thank you. Blessings to you. Oh, I just had that moment, Attorney Mark Fancher and Attorney Darrell Jones, because I feel like we're watching a new day. I do, but it's going to get tougher because the oligarchs and the powerful, they are scared, and th- because I guess losing their place, and it's going to take sustained struggle. It's not just going to happen in one fell swoop, Mark. But I think things are different. I do.
Yeah, revolution is not an event. It doesn't happen on an afternoon.
Mm,
And I'm not concerned really about the immediate outcomes of any of this.
mm,
I think that each day brings a new victory for the revolution, just in the sense that people become more conscious. They have an opportunity to look at and evaluate and assess the response of the state. Uh, how is it that the state responds to this particular action or this particular statement? It's all educational, it's all helpful to an analysis that's necessary, really, for the prospects for a long term revolution. And I think that, one of the concerns that I have frequently articulated is a concern that many of the students who are participating in this um, are still under the delusion that their protest is something that will be an effective way of communicating
hmm
an opinion that will be listened to by those in power, and that the people in power will somehow be persuaded by their persistence and by their courage and by all of the things that they're showing and by the eloquence of their statements. And that's totally misguided because there is no plan by any of the people in power to listen to or respond to these protesters at all.
hmm
And the value in doing this is to continue to highlight for people who are not thinking the contradictions between what the state says and what the state does. And so by highlighting those contradictions, it helps more people to wake up. It spreads the level of consciousness and raises it and makes revolution an even more likely possibility, if not probability. So all of this I think all of it
hmm
constitutes elements of victory,
hmm
and I think that everybody should be encouraged by it. The other thing that I've noticed, which is a very subtle kind of a thing, but I was watching coverage on CNN, and the reporter was having no luck at all in getting any of the protesters to submit to an interview. None of them agreed to speak to the media, none of them, which is very different from the way that activists in the past have dealt with media. They've tried to get the media to cover them. They've tried to speak to the media. They've tried to do it with the expectation that this was an opportunity for them to put their position before the public, for them to have an opportunity to get a platform. And the fact that they are sophisticated enough to understand that there's nothing to be gained by speaking to CNN
mm
uh, helps me to at least conclude that they learned the lesson that Gil Scott Heron tried to teach a long time ago, and that is that the revolution will not be televised.
Mm-hmm.
That you don't go around trying to do revolution out in the open. And if that's where their heads are, then that helps us to understand even more that they're looking beyond the prospect or the idea of trying to persuade policymakers and politicians to do the right thing. They're on a different course. And I think that if in fact where they're going is revolution, which is what I hope that they're doing, then it calls upon all of us to begin thinking very seriously about how that happens, because there is no one way to accomplish revolution. In some countries, where the political culture is one where people shoot their way into power, whether they're on the right or on the left, then revolution frequently happens with people shooting their way into power. That is not necessarily the political culture of this country. And that is not necessarily where revolution needs to lead us. But what it would be consistent with where we are in this country is whether we've actually had a democracy or not, we've always believed that that's what we have. We've always believed that those were important values. And if the state structure is not providing an opportunity for democratic participation, then people who are interested in something different need to just withdraw completely from the institutions of the state and begin figuring out ways to, among ourselves as a democratic community, to begin to create a new society. And that's on every level, politically, socially, economically. And when it comes time to figuring out how we're going to employ people, let's figure out how we can do that without necessarily having to involve the state. When we are going to figure out who's going to lead us, let's select our own leaders. We don't have to do it through the so-called democratic electoral process that they've given us. We create our own. And we're not going to limit it to just two parties. And definitely the Democratic and Republican parties are not invited. And so we begin to plan this way so that we withdraw, we create an alternative reality for the masses of the people. And again, that doesn't happen in an afternoon. But the more that we try to do it, the more that we go down that road, eventually, the more likely it is that we succeed.
It's a shift. The last 5 minutes I'm going to give to you, Daryl Jones. I'm glad you're able to come in because these people who are being arrested on these campuses, Attorney Mark Fancher, Attorney Daryl Jones, they can be voters. And in a race that's tighter than this, don't talk to me about Trump. This is happening now in a Democratic city with a Democratic governor and a Democratic president. There's some message that's not going to get through to these kids. There's some things you're not going to be able to say to them. Not when the NYPD is going on the campus of Columbia and scanning people's IDs so they can see who's demonstrating. Not when you're telling people you're not going to get a job now because you're not towing the line. Come on now. And then the president does not come out and say anything about it. Say, hey, no, this young black woman who's head of the law students at NYU, you better find her a job. No one's come to her defense. I mean, not over in that space. So in these last 5 minutes, what do you see?
Santita, one of the things that I see in the midst of all of this protest are young people and young voters that are expressing themselves, that are letting folks know that they do care and that they will be involved and they will be engaged. And a large part of what's happening is that oftentimes it takes a spark to really ignite the voters of a younger generation of those young voters. And this is that potential spark. This is something that's spreading across the country. And the college students, they're focused on this issue. And the question is, what will be the response of the government? Because these are all of these potential voters that are here. They're saying, I'm active, I'm concerned, this is my issue. and I want to push forward on it. But it's not going to just stop, I don't think, with them voting with regards to Biden or Trump or someone else. It's also going to filter down to those First Amendment organizations that are out there and those that support the First Amendment, those organizations that are dealing with policing, right, and over policing and how things are occurring there. All of these issues are what we're seeing come to a head for these Gen Zs and young millennial, really Gen Z voters that are the college students with where this is happening. And I really do believe that they'll go one of two ways. Either they will become so disillusioned that they will not want to be involved with voting and the government, or they'll take the other side and they'll say, you know what, we are the change we're looking for. We can be the ones that run for the office. We should have people that respond to our needs, to that a government that's responsive to us. And this is what our issues are. And those that are responding to us are the ones that we're going to vote for. So it's an incredible opportunity for the Gen Zs and the students to flex their power. We know that as of this year, 2024, that Gen Zs and young millennials make the largest potential voting bloc in this country. So if this is the spark that can ignite all of these young voters to come to the poll, they really can make the difference that they're trying to make now. And foreign policy, that's one of the areas where they'll be able to have an impact and have officials that are elected that will take the stands and the positions and the philosophy and the approach that the the Gen Zs and the young millennials want to have go forward. So it's an incredible opportunity, I think, that's presented to them, and it's going to be interesting to watch what they do. We know that the protesters can persuade policy, and they can also become the policy makers, and that's what I'm hoping comes out of these protests that we're seeing crop up and pop up all over the country.
I think you're going to see that and so much more, because I think that people are thinking beyond party. They're even thinking beyond electoral office because they see that they can lead. Dr. King never held elective office, but he changed the world. Gandhi didn't hold elective office. He changed the world. And then one or two other people did hold elective office, and they changed the world too. I think it takes a combination of all of these things. But people need to get involved, no matter what. If you know of a protest in Chicago, it just came across my screen that they are protesting at Northwestern. They're protesting all over the country. They're protesting at Black colleges. So I tell you what, our children they need food. They need toiletries. So if you can, get your church, get your sorority, get your fraternity, get your friends, and please get nearby. Get them some food and get them the supplies that they need so that they can make it. They're doing what really needs to be done. And I just hope that the people in the West Bank and in Gaza know that they're loved. But I hope that the people, I hope that the people of Israel know that they're loved too, even though many of us are in disagreement. Because many of them, they want their hostages home, but they want the war to continue. I don't want that. And you really should not want that either. And so I'm just praying for all of us to get this right. We have an opportunity. We really do. Stay tuned for the second hour of the Santita Jackson Show. What did I tell you? There's a real shift in the Republic. Do presidents have immunity? Should they? This is not just about Trump. This is really about presidents. The things that they've done, the things that they can do, the things that they actually do. Stay tuned for more of the Santita Jackson Show on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. Back in just a moment.